It's so great to see so many librarians here today. I'm so excited. I think we have over 70 people coming in. A couple housekeeping things. I'm Justine, if you don't know me. In your name tag, if you have the sit-down lunch for today in here, you should have a little purple ticket. Can you put that on your table? If you have a box lunch, everyone's welcome to bring that in. And I think I even saw people bringing their own sit-down luncheon from the back. That's great. I'm so excited to have Anita Salucci here today. When Pam and Jesse suggested her as a spotlight speaker, I was like, oh, I've seen her in School Library Journal before, but I didn't really know who she was. In the spring, I was able to hear her speak at the Massachusetts School Library Association conference, and I thought, oh, great pick. They did an awesome job. And then I got to spend several days with her out in Arizona for the standards training at AASL, and she's so smart and knows what she's talking about. It's not just words. So I'm going to read my prepared introduction. Anita Salucci is the teacher librarian at Westboro High School Library Learning Commons. She advises the Joint Public and School Teen Advisory Board, as well as a poetry spoken word team. She's a frequent speaker on library and educational topics, such as creating community, collaboration with public libraries, empowering teens, community literacy projects, guided inquiry design, mental health in libraries, building empathy. Oh man, sorry. Building empathy in education, curriculum development with content area teachers. She is currently the past president of the Massachusetts School Library Association. She's the co-recipient of the School Library Journal Scholastic School Librarian of the Year Finalist Award, the 2016-17 MSLA Web Seal of Excellence, and the 2017 MSLA Service Award. Anita is a guided inquiry design practitioner and has published a chapter in a book, Guided Inquiry Design in Action, High School. She writes a column for School Library Connection, Full Voice. Please join me in welcoming Anita Salucci.
Thank you, Justine, and thanks everyone for having me here today. I'm really excited to speak with you about some of my experiences in the school library. So libraries have been a continuous thread in my life from the time I was a young girl. I would be the child who volunteered in my family to walk to the post office every day because the public library was on the way, and I could stop there and get a book and just chill there for a while. And it really was a place of refuge for me, and it was a way for me to escape some of the things that were happening in my life at the time. And it's interesting to me that, throughout my life, it really has been a place that I can come back to. Obviously, I'm in one every day now for school, but it really is a place where I feel at home. I feel like I can be who I am, and it's really something that I've strived hard to give to students as well. I didn't always know I wanted to be a librarian, but I did know that how the library made me feel, and how we feel is really so important to how we react to things and what we do with our lives from there. So I realized this as an adult, and as it ended up working in business for a while, and then was having some struggles in my life and decided that I needed to do something different, and drove past the public library one day and was like, I really want to work there. So I did, and spent 5 years in a public library and really learned a lot there, and realized that my passion was with kids when I was there. I was filling in for the Portuguese story hours and really enjoyed being in the children's room. So I, from there, decided that I wanted to go back to school and be a school librarian. So that's where my journey started with school libraries. This is my 18th year in school libraries, which seems like it's gone so very quickly. But it's really been a journey that I would like to share with all of you. And I'm hoping that today you'll be able to take something away that you can do in your libraries as well, or in your education spaces. Oh, that was supposed to be up for my introduction. So, I really do think that in order to begin this journey, you need to know your community. So when we talk about social-emotional learning and we talk about, what our why is in our libraries, we hear people say that a lot, like, what's your why? Seth Godin does a whole thing on it. I think Simon Sinek does something on it. I've heard Joyce Valenza talk about it. And knowing your why can sometimes be something that you have to soul search for, like, why are you there every day? And there can be a lot of minutia and different types of things that we need to get through to get to our why. But knowing your community comes into that. Knowing what your principal is thinking about, knowing the core educational practices in your school, what's missing for students. And so that's been where I've spent a lot of my time really thinking, is what is missing for my students? And what value do I bring to what's missing? So what can I bring that maybe no one else has thought of? And I really believe that school libraries are in a unique position that we can create ripples of change, and we can create thought movements to change different things in our community and change things for our students. So, how can we show our value, though? Like, showing that is the hardest part. We need to be able to assess things and show data and all of that. But I think that it starts with a plan, right? So how can you plan intentionally about what you'd like to do? This is a design plan that I found on Agency by Design. It's through Harvard University. It's one of their projects. And I was really, I saw a presentation by Agency Design a couple of years ago, and I really liked this framework of thinking about how to make change. So if you're looking closely at something, you're exploring that complexity and you're finding the opportunity. So to find the opportunity, you're building on those close observations. You're thinking about those complexities perhaps in a different way, and seeing potential where there's complexity. So where in your schools might there be a place where you could bring in this change making? Also looking closely, who do you need to collaborate with? Who can you outreach to? Is it somebody in the community? Is it someone within your school? And what are your goals? I think always starting with that, that backwards design of where are you trying to end up? And for me, equity has always been something that's really important. Providing equity for all students in my building, making sure that it's not just geared to those high-performing students, but to all students. So what ways can we include value with that? So when I started to think about my plan for this, I've been in Westboro. This is my 8th year in Westboro. In 2014, excuse me, we started getting information back. We do a Metro West mental health wellness survey with our students. All students take it. And we started to get some disturbing information back about it. And especially for girls, the trend was that there's more depression, more suicide ideation, more not connecting at school and things like that. So that really had me thinking about what could I do, and what could I do in a way that people would listen. So I decided to write a grant, but I also looked at the national trends, like what was happening in other schools at this time with other adolescents, with other students. And these are statistics from NAMI.org, and these are from 2017, but they're very similar to what it was prior to this. We're living in a time when 1 in 5 children and adolescents have a diagnosable mental health condition. And I think that we would all agree that most teachers and educators are not prepared to deal with this. So thinking about that and thinking about making change and how to help my students, and if it means, if I'm thinking about helping all my students, well, then it's also those students who are struggling. This is the 2016 study, and this is a snippet of the entire Metro West area, so this isn't specific to Westboro. But again, we see those numbers climbing. Around this time, I also started looking into social-emotional learning and what that meant, and how to bring some of those elements into our school. And you know, there were pockets of some of these things happening, but it wasn't in a way that was really reaching a lot of kids. It was mostly reaching kids who needed it in that moment, instead of being something that we looked at long-term, looked at as a way to create change. So I did write the grant, and it was really, it was a humbling experience to do that. It was a federal grant, so it was several months to write that and rewrite it, and they had some struggles putting me into which category it should go into, because I was doing something that ended up being in the innovative category for grants. They now do have, the Mass Board of Library Commissioners now does have a grant that's for mental health, so that's been great, that now other schools can apply for this. But my whole idea was to, you know, create community, to write this grant around ending some stigma around students who are struggling. And so my way to do that was through this mental health data. I think, you know, we all know in schools that that data is so important, so how can you show that and be able to connect it to what you'd like to do? So see, these are some of the things that were in my grant. Having a whole school assembly called In Our Own Voice, which was adolescents with lived experience who came in and talked about their experiences. It also, they also came into our psychology and literature class. Around this time, I also was getting more training on guided inquiry design, so I started working with teachers on how to implement some of this through research and to bring it in a way to all students. And then, you know, there were also elements of yoga, mindfulness, and we had a poetry residence, and the focus of that was also on mental health, where at the end of that day, we had a culmination of work from all of the students, which we created into a mural, which now hangs in the library. And that mural has been used quite a bit in the way that our students who are in we have a classroom called Center for Student Success, and those are typically students who are coming back from a hospitalization, and it can be any hospitalization, but coming back has been traumatic for them, and being able to integrate back into their studies and into their classes. So a lot of those students will come into the library, and it's just sort of a touch point for them sometimes, where they can just take a few minutes and reground. We also, for the grant, had an author that came in, and we did a town read that had some elements of mental health as well. So these are just some pictures from that. We did a large coloring sheet, and as you may have seen that picture before, that was one of the ones that was in School Library Journal. So another thing that I've also been doing is bibliotherapy. And this has been really interesting to bring into school, because I think that, you know, all librarians have an element of this where they talk with students about, you know, what type of book might be helpful to them, or we know a student and we know that they're struggling with something, so we try to match that up in some way. But we did this in a much more intentional way, where I have been working with the clinical staff, and at this time we were doing individual meetings with the students. The student would meet with the clinician and then come have a meeting with me, and it was sort of informal initially, and then we made it into a much more formal program, which now we're doing 6-week groups, basically, where the clinician is there in the group with me, and we write curriculum around this, and it brings in different elements of DBT and mindfulness and yoga, and not in a way that kids are like, you know, you're trying to make me do this yoga or whatever, but more in a way that it's integrated into what we're doing. So for example, one of the things we did for yoga with the first group was taught them how to do mountain pose. And if you've taken any yoga classes before, a mountain pose is very empowering. So it was a way to give them a sense of power. And I talked about with them how, you know, it can be, I'm actually standing in it right now, but it can be a way that you know, when you have to do something that might be nerve-wracking for you, or something that you need to build up some courage for, that you can stand in this pose, or you need to go take a test, stand in that pose, and it might give you some empowerment. Also, these collaborative activities have been great in creating a sense of community. What's also been awesome through all of this is that my administrator has been right on board with everything. When I was writing the grant, they were also writing a grant for that CSS classroom, so it fit completely with what his goals were. And you know, that goes back to what I was talking about initially, like, what is your principal up at night thinking about? What are the big issues in your school where you can, you know, bring some of these things in? And you know, I'm going to talk about some other things that can be done sort of one-off. They don't have to be an ongoing program like the DBT or yoga or something like that. Things like having lunch in the library. When I initially suggested that, I thought my custodians might never speak to me again. But we've been doing that now for 3 years, and this year I did have to limit some of the spaces where the students can sit because it just got too overwhelming. It's just, I am very lucky to have a full-time para, but during lunch block, each of us need to eat as well, and you know, it's really busy. There are classes also that come in during that time, so we did limit. Just part of the library is for that. But at the same time this year, they also opened up the lobby as a place for kids to go to eat their lunch. And then once a month, I do a listening lunch. And that's also part of a Learning Commons philosophy, where you give a space and an opportunity for students to perform. So that's been, you know, really amazing as well, where kids, and I really do it much more laid back. Our school has a very integrated fine arts program. Most of the students play an instrument or are in chorus or band or something. And so I didn't want it to be like it was an audition. I really wanted it to have that coffee house feel. So that's really what it is. Students can sign up online, or they can just stop in and tell me they're interested in doing it. I actually have one tomorrow. Or they can just show up. You know, I just let it be flexible like that. And sometimes there will be somebody who comes in and says, I'm not sure, can I just, you know, show you first? And I also let them do that. So that's been a great way to provide, you know, that relaxing atmosphere for students in the library during their lunch too. I was speaking with some students this week and asking them, you know, why do they choose the library, especially this year where they're allowed to go more places? And several of them said to me that they choose it because they are allowed to have, you know, I have several areas that have smaller settings, so there are little tables where a few of them can sit. They can have conversation. It's not as overwhelming as the cafeteria. So all things that we probably already know. But one girl said to me, my anxiety isn't bad in here. I can come in and sit and have my lunch and I can eat. And so, you know, those types of comments, when you know that it really is making a difference, maybe for only a handful of kids, but it's making a difference. So, so that's why, you know, we keep going with that. The Teen Advisory Board is actually a joint Teen Advisory Board, which means that I work directly with the public library for our Teen Advisory Board. And so that's been amazing. I started that, I was lucky that the director of the public library was starting at the same year that I was beginning in that district. So we had a meeting that summer before school started, and we both talked about what our goals were and talked about how we wanted to provide, spaces for students' voice and to work together on that. So we've been doing that now this is our 8th year. Last year, we had a program come in, and several of us were asked to be included in it, and I was very happy that they asked me to be included as well. It was the wellness teachers and some clinicians and myself. This year, it's actually been brought in to be for any teacher who wanted to sign up. But if you haven't heard of DBT, it's dialectical behavior therapy, and it's a cognitive behavior method which helps with emotion dysregulation. So it gives students ways to voice what they're thinking and feeling. It also, what our hope is and our goal is that it makes it across the board that all teachers have a way to talk about this with students. One of the things I mentioned initially was that most teachers don't have training for these things, so bringing in training has been really important. Having training myself has been really important, and I think that, in order to bring many of these programs in and to do these things, it's important to have that aspect of training. So in the library, again, the DBT is part of the groups that we're doing. It's thinking about, how to use these in everyday language with students. So if a student isn't making a good choice, saying something to them like, I think you need to use your wise mind thinking, or, how about if we try wise mind, and then give them an example. If we, I already mentioned integrating small elements of yoga. Mindfulness moments, so reflective writing. That's been a nice way for students to sort of center themselves. And then pair sharing with Wise Mind, so giving them the language has really been really impactful. Later today, I'm presenting on guided inquiry, and it's a complex design process that can be used in many different ways. I bring it up here because it was a way to collaborate with science and allow them to, they had just integrated this past year, they integrated their next gen standards, and it was a way to allow the students to really do something that was hands-on and also give them the thinking process to do it with. And throughout guided inquiry, it is meant to be a process that not only are students reflecting on their learning, but teachers are having reflective conversations about what's happening, so that as you are teaching and as students are actively engaged, that you are able to say, this worked well with this group, but maybe not so much with this period, so let's try something a little bit different. Again, with technical engineering, getting the arts involved as well, working with the Teen Advisory Board, so really just opening up a lot of ways that the library can be part of the community, part of a safe, brave space. I know we've been using safe space for a long time, and when I started to get involved with spoken word and slam poetry, the thing we talk about in those circumstances is brave space and what that means for students and how teachers can bring that. And I think that you can't talk about social emotional learning without talking about safe and brave space. Like, you need to be willing to have those tough conversations either with your students, with other teachers, with your principal, and really, know that you're using your wise mind and you're thinking in a way that is going to be beneficial to the rest of the community. So again, psychology and literature, that class really lends itself to working with social emotional learning with them. We do a lot of mindfulness in there. We do a lot of reflective writing. social interactions, conferencing, and then we also bring in ways to make it authentic for them. So they're choosing to do their research, much like our keynotes we're talking about today, with student choice, with them deciding what's interesting to them from what they've been learning and what do they want to dig deeper into. And most of the time in this class, it's really interesting that most of the students will choose something that relates to their either a friend, family member, or to themselves. We've had several students who have then sought help afterwards. And I didn't mention this earlier, but with the NAMI presentations as well, students have asked for help afterwards. And really, a lot of the questions that came up during that session was, how do I help my friend? Like, I know my friend is struggling, and we all know that teens go to other teens, right? Kids go to kids. So how do we make sure our kids have the information they need to be able to help each other? And that's part of that social emotional framework that we're all in it together, and that we're all trying to make sure we have the skills. I work a lot with special education, and we have academic support classes, and those classes are focused on transition planning and what they're going to do beyond high school. And the high school that I'm in is a very high-performing high school where about 97% of the students go on to college. So those 3% that don't are sometimes forgotten about. So again, as I mentioned, it was really important to me to find those places that I felt that the students weren't getting what they needed. So this is a way to work with special ed in a different capacity, where we're talking about their habitudes. And if you're not familiar with Angela Myers, I do recommend that you look her up. She has a lot of interesting research and work around habitudes. So the habits and attitudes of our students, what are they bringing to the table? What are they able to do, and how can we support them? And then, of course, the literacy support. So supporting them in a different way, where it's a much more intentional focus around interviews with those students and talking to them about their reading life. I've always had an issue with the term reluctant reader. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it just doesn't feel right to me. So I really try to talk to students about their reading life, whatever that looks like, and try to do it in a way that's non-judgmental. And now I've seen that, like, teachers come to me and say, I'm not really a reader, but is there something that you could help me with, especially for our summer reading program? They'll come and ask for suggestions. So I think, there are these small ways that we can bring this social emotional wellness, that we're doing it for the teachers as well. So this is just a sample of some of the coursework that we do in Google Classroom. I'm also the place where, we have an internship program for seniors, and lots of teachers will ask a student to be their intern. I tend to hang back and let administration know that I can be a place where they have that tough to place student, or maybe there's a student who doesn't have a class and an internship might be effective for them. Or the students who have disabilities, is there a way that I can give them something to do? So this student here, Gia, she's in the severe disability classroom, and she's been working, last year she worked all year long in the library, and she was helping process books. So she was stamping, taking off labels, putting on new labels. And every day she would come in and say, I'm ready for work, I'm ready for work. So it really was impactful for her that it made a difference. And this year, she's actually working at the public library. So we also made that transition to introduce her to the director there and help her grow. This year, my SMART goals, I'm not sure if you guys do those in New Hampshire or not, but for the evaluation, we each have to have a student goal and a professional goal, and this year mine are around the ESL department. And it's not that I've never worked with the ESL department before, because I have, but I really wanted to do it in an intentional way this year. I wanted to make sure that it was in our plan books, that we were going to be collaborating, that we were going to be working together with students to create a love of reading for some of these students, to give them the way and the path to get to where they need to be to get into a typical English classroom. And I used to say, I want to provide a place for student voice, and now I really think, and I heard that word earlier today too, amplify student voice, that you are not the way for them, you're just, helping them to get their voice louder. And so the slam poetry and spoken word has been amazing for that. Last year, after the election, there were lots of students in my building who were feeling uncomfortable and having some struggles with that. And many of them were my poetry students. And we used our poetry time for the first few months to come together and have discussions and to talk about what was happening in our building and talk about, how this was making them feel and give them an outlet to write about it. And our group poem actually came from those discussions. And they talked about their identity in that group poem. So I think that providing these ways for students to think about these things. And I was intentional in the sense that, yes, I wanted this space for them, and we were going to be on the poetry slam, in the poetry slam competition, but it didn't start out as, let's have these discussions. So it was also listening to them. So these are just some of the pictures over the last few years of the student performances. A few years back, I had a whole senior group who wanted to perform all the time. So they were great, and they were good at bringing in underclassmen as well. Bringing in outside poets and outside community artists and change makers, giving students a way to have these conversations with other adults besides for the adults in the building. Teen Advisory, the bottom right corner, 2 members from Teen Advisory last year went with me to the State House for our legislative day. So it was a field trip for them, and they got to speak with legislators about why they think the library is important. So I think that's so effective when we can get the students to talk about what it means to them. The Teen Advisory is also doing, you may be familiar with Humans of New York. They wanted to do something similar in Westboro, and many high schools have done this before, but we wanted to add a slight twist that we wanted to make sure to capture stories from outside of the school, not just teachers, not just students, but also our community members. So we're still working on that. That's a little bit challenging, but it's really been a great project for them, photojournalism project where they are taking the pictures, they're doing the interviews. Some people have submitted things online, so there's that aspect as well. But it's been a nice way to showcase some of the different types of people that are in our community. So I mentioned this already, and I didn't bring time up here. How are we doing for time? Okay, awesome, thank you. So getting there, right? So being able to provide some of these opportunities in your space, I can't stress enough that having some sort of training is important. These are just some of the resources. There are many, many more, but I thought I didn't want to overwhelm people either. So you can always reach out to me if you have an idea or thought about something. But these were 4 of the main ways that I have gotten training and made sure to share that training with my teachers through PD or ask the principal to bring in training for the teachers as well. Oh, let me just go back 1 second. I didn't mention this earlier, the mental health first aid certification, that's something that the when I was first implementing my grant, the LSTA grant, the neighboring Youth and Family Services, so not the Westboro, but Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, reached out to the public library to say that they had gotten a grant to provide training for the mental health first aid certification. And the public library director immediately contacted me and said, you know, this works perfectly for what you're doing in the library. Let's try to work on this together. So we did, and that first year we had 10 teachers and myself trained in the certification. And again, it's just another avenue to provide the language to teachers and to have that same process that we're all using to identify students and to help get students to the help that they need. One other thing I want to make sure I say as well is that, you know, the library has not become a counseling office. It hasn't become, they don't come to me for clinical help. I am just sort of facilitating some of this, where I'm helping, you know, get things started and get some of those conversations going in different parts of the building. But I am not a clinician, and I don't pretend to be. So I think that's really an important thing to remember. You know, students will come to you, and they will, and I'm sure they do even without doing these things. So just, you know, knowing that, yes, you have some training, but most of this training is all about making sure to know what those resources are in your community and to know who those people are that you need to get your students to, and the language to use to do that. So again, some more resources. I did put together a mental health LibGuide. It's open, so anybody can access it. I've put the link in here. I put some of the other things in here as well. And again, those community resources, they're out there. Sometimes we don't know what they are. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, if you contact them, they probably have a list for your area of what all those resources are. And there are many more than what I've listed here for my area, but these are the major ones. And then they're, you know, very specific as to, you know, what the issue may be or what your students may need. So I've put my contact information here. I'm happy to answer questions. This, you know, has been 45 minutes is kind of a short time to get a lot of this information in, but I wanted to make sure to give you sort of an overview of what I've done in my library for this. I hope that there's a nugget that you can take away that might be something you want to try, or something that you're doing that you want to expand on. You know, the Facebook group, the Empathetic Librarian group, it's not just for librarians, it's for all educators. I really want it to be a discussion space where we can all share what we know and our expertise and help each other. Because, you know, I think that if you're just starting this, it's hard to know who to go to talk to about it. And having each other to bounce ideas off of can be really helpful. So I don't know if we're, okay.
Thank you, Anita. So we're really good for time. Lunch will be coming out at 12:15. I did want to mention that the resources are linked on that resource sheet on the CMTC website. Yes. The link's not working currently? Okay, we will investigate that. Okay, so we're troubleshooting that, and that will definitely be up sometime before the end of the day. I also wanted to remind you, if you're interested in learning more about the guided design, Anita's session is at 2:30 in Couriers, which is the room that's right by the front desk check-in for the hotel. It's kind of a room that sneaks behind. You have to go up a couple stairs, so I don't want you to miss out on that if you're interested in learning more about that. I think that's it. All right, thanks guys. Lunch will be coming out.